we're going to go straight to Washington first with the top story really of this afternoon, which was President Obama making some statements about possible tough new sanctions on Iran. Nathan, what's the latest?
Right, today was the deadline for the White House to either clear the way for these new sanctions or to block them. And today, President Obama issued a finding that essentially said that these new sanctions, which were imposed by congressional legislation, would not have a significant impact on world markets. So that does pave the way for sanctions to kick in against companies that do business with Iran's central bank, the main conduit for Iran's oil revenue, sort of at the end of June.
So I'm curious, Nathan, I mean, you talked about the president giving reassurances about world markets. Let's talk about geopolitics. The U.S. moving forward, taking the next step towards these sanctions. What's going to be the fallout politically from Iran and from the Middle East?
Well, one of the things that's been going on in recent weeks are moves not on the political front, but on sort of the economic front to reassure other countries and to reassure oil markets that the oil markets would be able to absorb the potential shock from the cutoff of Iranian oil. For instance, U.S. officials have hinted at the possibility of releasing something from the U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserves. Okay, so that's one option. Okay, on the political side, we've got other things that are going on right now, which is ratcheting up the pressure. We've seen rhetoric that kind of goes in a sort of a sine wave. Sometimes it's stepped up, sometimes it's a little bit subdued or muted, but all the while sort of raising or continuing the threat of possible military action against Iran if it doesn't give up its nuclear ambitions.
And Nathan, you said that it raises the possibility that we could open up strategic reserves. A lot of people are focusing on gas prices, which have been inching higher. What should consumers or customers out there who are listening make of this new development? Will it have a direct impact on gas prices for them at the pump?
Yeah, right. As you mentioned, I mean, this is coming at a kind of a really inconvenient time. That's the one sort of pocketbook issue that people really think about, especially when they go to the polls later on this year. If gas is hovering around $4 a gallon or costing even more, that's really going to have an impact when people think about, is this going to have an impact on who you're going to vote for come November? So certainly that, I'm sure, plays into the calculation here in Washington. It's been a subject of a lot of heated rhetoric here about whether or not the president or the administration are doing the right kinds of things, to tamp down prices at the pump. But it's not just in the United States that this is a concern. We're talking about global oil markets and whether or not it could absorb the shock from this cutoff of Iranian oil.
Yeah, Nathan, and on that same note, I'm wondering, with so much at stake in terms of potentially derailing if there is a global recovery, the global recovery, is there anything happening, do you hear anything in Washington about backdoor discussions with Iran or its neighbors or its allies? Do you hear any talk about something happening in the background? Today we hear the public announcement, but is there anything sort of happening in the back channels that maybe we're going to reach some sort of tentative agreement or even just a truce in terms of ratcheting up the tension?
There are kind of a number of tripwires, maybe we could say. There are lots of things that maybe still could happen, in between now and sometime later in the summer when these sanctions actually would start to kick in. And as we've said today, what happens today essentially just clears the way for these sanctions to take effect. Now, remember, in recent weeks and months, Iran has very often responded with some pretty aggressive rhetoric in response to the sort of ratcheting up of tensions. For instance, threats to close the Strait of Hormuz. This is a key conduit for global oil supply. That obviously disturbs world markets. And of course, there are Iran's neighbors in the region, which are also very, very anxious right now about what kind of measures Iran could take to retaliate, because it doesn't necessarily have to retaliate with military action. There are other things that could happen that could also unsettle the region, which is still sort of reeling from all the political changes that it's seen over the past year.
All right, Nathan Hodge from Washington, thank you so much for that update. And of course, everybody can continue to cover this story and follow it on WSJ.com.